I will deliver you, and you will honor me.
Good morning again. Thanks, Kaden. We can give Kaden one more hand for 5 years. So I try really hard to not treat him like my son, even though he's the age of my kids, and he's already got a mom on staff, but sometimes he can't help it, so he helps take care of me. That's one of his side jobs that he doesn't know about. So, good morning again, and again, we are so thankful that you are here, that you got out in the weather. I know some of you I talked to this week, some of your cars were still stuck in places and trying to get out, so thank you again for being here. So, we have been reading through the Bible. A lot of us are reading throughout this year, and if you are reading with us, this past week, we finished our 3rd book of the Bible. So give yourself a hand if you're with us. I know some of you started at different times in different groups, so we're kind of not always on the same literal page that we're reading together. But we've been reading for a whole month. Now, as we get further in the Bible, because like we said, that what we're going to be talking about each week is based on what we have read that week before. Thank you. I was going to ask for a little bit more light. I couldn't see any of you guys out there. What we are reading is based on what we have read the week before, what we're talking about. But I won't, as we get further in, I'm not going to be able to always go back and catch everybody up. But I do each week kind of want to give just a little idea of kind of where we are in the whole story. Because as we read, we're going to realize that everything kind of connects together. From Genesis to Revelation, the book of the Bible is one whole big narrative. And so it is important to kind of know where we're at. So we have talked a lot about Abraham. Remember, he was Abram, then changed to Abraham. We talked about the promise that God gave him for this whole nation to come from him. And since we haven't met for a couple of weeks, if you were reading, we had Abraham had Isaac, his son that the promise came from. There were some issues that went around with that. That's actually what we were going to talk about last week, but we're going to move on. And then Isaac had 2 twins that were Jacob and Esau. And there was a lot of dysfunction in that family. And that's going to be kind of the word that we're going to stick with in the whole nation of Israel is dysfunction. There's a lot of family drama, family dysfunction that comes. So today we are looking at Jacob, who was one of Isaac's sons, and he was the son that carried on the promise from Abraham. So we're looking at one of his sons today, who is named Judah. Now, Judah is the firstborn son of Leah. Jacob had 2 wives, and these 2 wives were sisters, but they did not get along because Jacob was actually tricked into marrying Leah, but really loved Rachel, her sister. So Judah is the firstborn son of Leah, the one that Jacob really didn't love and kind of was tricked by the father, but tricked into marrying her. So as the firstborn, in this culture, the firstborn had certain rights. They would get the inheritance, they would get to carry on the father's name. To be a firstborn in this culture was a really big deal. But even though Judah was the firstborn as far as just actual age order, Joseph was the firstborn of Rachel, who was the wife that Jacob really loved. So Jacob was giving the firstborn blessings to Joseph. And if you have watched anything about Joseph, there's tons of movies, the Technicolor Dreamcoat, all the stuff about Joseph. If you have ever watched any of that, you know when we're going to read, we have read over the past week or so about Joseph's story, but at this time, Joseph kind of lords it over his brothers. He'll go to his brothers and he'll talk to them about these dreams that he had about, them all bowing down to him and how he's going to be in control of all of them. And so he's kind of like this little brother who is getting all the special treatment and then kind of putting it in the face of the older brothers. So I think especially to Judah, this is upsetting because Judah should be getting all of the rights of being the firstborn because he is the literal firstborn. So they decide to, first they're going to throw Joseph in a pit. They end up selling him into slavery. So that is where we're going to start. The brothers have just sold Joseph into slavery. He is, we can see him going off into the distance down the road with the Egyptian slave traders, and his brothers are there. Now we're going to be reading Genesis 38 today, and I've kind of broken it up in little chunks for us. But we're going to be sticking with this older brother, Judah, and see what happens to him and how God is with him. So we're going to start right at the very beginning of Genesis 38. We're going to read verses 1 through 5 first. It happened at that time, so right after Joseph was sold into slavery, at that time that Judah went down from his brothers and turned aside to a certain Adullamite whose name was Hira. There Judah saw the daughter of a certain Canaanite whose name was Shua. He took her and went into her, and she conceived and bore a son. And he called his name She conceived again and bore a son, and she called his name Onan. Yet again she bore a son, and she called his name Shelah. Judah was in Chezib when she bore him. So this story of Judah kind of disrupts the narrative of Joseph. So Joseph has just been sold into slavery. It's kind of like, if you like to read or watch movies, it's kind of like this cliffhanger. Like, what's going to happen to Joseph? And then all of a sudden, we hear about Judah and how he's gone and how he is getting married and having these kids. So he's at this critical juncture in his life. And we really have to think about the culture. Remember, we talk about this every time we read the Bible, that we have to think about who it was written to at that time and what was going on at that time. So because Joseph to Jacob, they told Jacob the father that Joseph has been killed. So those firstborn rights would now go to Judah. So the thing that we think that he wanted and that he's doing this for and that he was upset about, that he's going to get that. But instead of staying around his family and getting that inheritance, getting that firstborn rights, he immediately takes off to a foreign land and marries a foreign woman. So people reading this in this day later, the Jewish people that would be reading this, they would realize what a big deal that is. They would realize something is up. Something is not right with this story, because why would he not stick around to get those firstborn rights? And so they kind of realize that they're awaiting some kind of crisis. The original readers of this text, they know something is wrong. Something is going to happen. They're exactly right. So we're going to keep reading. We're still in Genesis 38. And Judah took a wife for his firstborn, and her name was Tamar. But Judah's firstborn, was wicked in the sight of the Lord, and the Lord put him to death. Judah said to Onan, "Go into your brother's wife and perform the duty of the brother-in-law and raise up offsprings for your brother." Now we're going to pause here for just a second. This is what's called a levirate marriage. So in this culture, it was very important for a woman to have children, especially sons, because they were the ones that would take care of her. They're the ones that would be able to own property later. And also for a man, having a son to carry on your name was really important. So if a man died and his wife, that they didn't have any children or anything to carry on his name, they had this levirate marriage law, which would mean that someone in the family would marry that woman, and then the firstborn son that they had together would actually be her first husband's offspring, and would carry on his name, and would almost be looked at as his child. And so immediately after he died, that's what Judah did. Judah told Tamar that now she needed to marry the second son. And the second son was Onan. And we're going to get a little PG-13 rated for just a second. So the Bible gets a little crazy. I'm just telling you, you never know what you're going to read. So Onan, the second son, knew that the offspring would not be his. So whenever he went into his brother's wife, he would waste the semen on the ground. Told you, a little crazy. So not to give his brother the offspring. And what he did was wicked in the sight of the Lord, and he was put to death also. So Onan was super selfish because, like I said, it sounds really weird to us, but he did not want that son to be his brother's. So he made sure he had sex with her. He took pleasure from her, but he made sure that she would not get pregnant and have a son that would be his, not be his, and not be able to be his offspring. So the Lord put him to death also. Then Judah said to Tamar, his daughter-in-law, "Remain a widow in your father's house till Shelah," remember that's the third son, "my son grows up." For he feared that he would die like his brothers. So Tamar went and remained in her father's house. Okay, so Tamar was chosen for the eldest, and then without really her consent, without being able to mourn her first husband, it says that he was wicked. We don't know, it doesn't really tell us why, what happened. He was put to death. She immediately had to marry Onan. Onan took pleasure but did not care for her, obviously, because not only would that son carry on her first husband's name, but he would also be able to help her as, that she could own property through him and things like that. He was killed. So now she is sent to her father's house. She is in the widow's garments. She is not allowed to marry. She is looked at as a widow, and she is supposed to be waiting for this third son, Shelah, to grow up to be able to marry her. So that's kind of as she leaves. Now, the way it reads, it makes it sound like Judah is going to be respectable and be responsible, because he says, go to your father's house until Shelah is older. But then the writer lets us, as the reader, in on a little secret that Tamar doesn't know. He actually says, but he was afraid his son would die. Now, Tamar doesn't know that, but that gives us a clue that something's going to happen. He doesn't really want her to marry the third son, because not anything that she did, but her first two husbands have died. So when she goes to her father's house, she kind of gets this reputation when people talk about Tamar, because her first two husbands have died. So what's up with Tamar? What's wrong with her? And you can just imagine, even today, if that happened, you can imagine the people that would talk, for us, the podcast that would come from that, all the different things that would happen. And so there's always these whispers around Tamar. What did she do? why do her husbands die? Like, what's going on with her? And so she's kind of looked down on. And she's there at her father's house in her widow's clothing, having to follow the laws of a widow. Now, so at the same time, Judah is kind of fearing for Sheila's life. He doesn't want Tamar to marry his third son, but she does not know that yet. So we're going to keep reading and see what happens. In the course of time, the wife of Judah, Shua's daughter, died. When Judah was comforted, he went up to Timnah to the sheep shearers and his friend Hira the Adullamite. And when Tamar was told, your father-in-law is going to Timnah to shear his sheep, she took off her widow's garments and covered herself with a veil. Okay, so remember she's in, I looked for a picture of what widow's garments looked at that time, and I couldn't find anything, but I just imagined black, maybe a black veil, something like that. But she took that off, and she covered herself with a different kind of veil, something else. She wrapped herself up and sat at the entrance of Enam, which is on the road to Timnah. So Judah's on the road to Timnah, and Tamar has placed herself on that road at the entrance to a city. For she saw that Shelah, the third son, had grown up, but had not yet been given in marriage. So she's like, hey, he's old now. Like, we could get married, but I'm still here in my widow's garments. When Judah saw her, he thought she was a prostitute, for she had covered her face. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more, why he would think that. He turned to her at the roadside and said, come, let me come into you, for he did not know that she was his daughter-in-law. And she said, what will you give me that you may come into me? He answered, I will send you a young goat from the flock. Okay, so we're going to put this in perspective because it's weird. Like I said, especially Old Testament is really weird sometimes. So he's coming in, he sees this lady that he thinks is a prostitute, he wants to do business with her, and so he said, I'll send you a goat. And she's like, okay, well, you can send me a goat, but you don't have it right now. So she replies, what if you give me a pledge, something that will prove that I'm going to get this goat later until you send it? What pledge shall I give you? She replied, your signet and your cord and your staff that is in your hand. Now, we're going to talk in detail what that is later, but that's basically, in today's terms, kind of giving his driver's license and a social security card. Like, he's saying, hold on to these things. This is my identity. Hold on to these things, and then I will send you a goat. And when you get that goat, you can give those back to me. But that's showing that I am going to pay for this interaction. So he gave them to her, and he went into her, and she conceived by him. Then she arose and went away. Taking off her veil, she put back on her garments of widowhood. Okay, so are we tracking with that interaction that happens? Tamar knows what's going on, but Judah did not know what happened. Now, that very first verse that we read, verse 12, says, in the course of time. So time has gone on. It doesn't tell us exactly how much time, but enough time for Sheila to have grown up enough to be able to get married. And although those years have passed, Tamar's status is still the same. She's still having to live as a widow. She's still having to stay with her dad. She's still having to, keep those widow garments on, follow the laws of being a widow. But Judah has lost his wife, has been able to kind of do whatever he wants. His status has changed. Now, it's sheep shearing time. And that's what it said at the beginning, that he was going to shear the sheep. So what would happen is that the shepherds would be the ones that would follow all the sheep around, and when it was time for them to be sheared, the owners would come to what pasture, wherever they were at, and they would all get together, and it was kind of like a big festival, a big party, and there was lots of drunkenness there. There were cult prostitutes that would come there, because wherever there were a bunch of men hanging out, getting drunk, these prostitutes thought they could, make some money from them. So it was not strange that he thought that Tamar was a prostitute whenever he saw her, because there would have been others hanging around at that point in time. Now, as we look at this story, we're going to look at 3 things that we can get from this story. First of all, we are living in a wildly different culture than they did then. So if you're thinking about, this sounds so strange to us, you are right. Because the culture of Genesis 38 was this shame and honor culture. And everything was within the family. People were protected within the family. People were shunned. People were taken care of. People sought justice. All of this stuff was within the family. And they were also very motivated by having children. That was what carried on their name. That's what kept women safe, all of those things. So we have to kind of look at it through a different lens, that was of utmost, having a child would literally save Tamar's life. That was what it was important to her. Now, like I said, that the pledge itself, the cord, the signet, the staff, all of that was really significant because it was like this transfer of power. So if you think about I just think about old movies where they would have the wax seal on different letters and things. That's kind of like what that signet and the rod was. It was like a stamp that would say, this is Judah's whatever. And so it was his identity. That's why I said it was kind of like our driver's license or social security card. It was his identity. What is so interesting is that at first, Judah has the control. And it looks like the whole time Judah has the control, because he has the control of Tamar's life, because he has not yet allowed her to marry Shelah. So he has control. But when she takes his identity, it's like a shift in balance there, a shift in power and control, because now she has his identity. She has control over the situation. And so the actual act that happened was to Judah's pleasure, but we know, because we can kind of see behind the scenes, that it's actually Tamar's pleasure, because what she has been trying to do, what she's been trying to figure out, is actually kind of coming all to place right now. So her plans are coming together. And this next section, the next 6 verses we're going to read, should be a movie. It's one of the best. I spent the time snowed in. I think I watched 4 limited series during that time that were all total thrillers and whodunit kind of things. And this would be perfect. So if you like those kind of things, get ready. So we're going to keep going. So when Judah sent a young goat by his friend, the Adullamite, so he's saying, I'm paying for what I did. I'm paying for this act. So he's sending this goat through his friend, Adullamite, to take back the pledge from the woman's hand. He did not find her. And he asked the men of the place, where is the cult prostitute who was at Enom on the roadside? And they said, no cult prostitute has been here. So he returned to Judah and said, I have not found her. Also, the men of the place said there was no prostitute that had been here. So Judah replied, let her keep the things of mine as her own, or we shall be laughed at. So remember I said that transfer of power. He's like, just let her keep my identity. I don't want to make a big deal of it because I don't want people to know what went on. People would laugh at us. You see, I sent the young goat. I did what I was supposed to do, and you did not find her. Okay, now we're going to move on. About 3 months later, Judah was told, Tamar, your daughter-in-law, has been immoral. Moreover, she is pregnant by this immorality. So remember, she's supposed to be a widow. She's supposed to be waiting for Sheila. Nothing is supposed to be going on with her, but she winds up pregnant. So Judah says, bring her out and let her be burned. And you can just see that, self-righteousness in him. As she was being brought out, she sent word to her father-in-law, by the man to whom these belong, I am pregnant. So she's like, I'm going to give the identity of the man that I'm pregnant by. And I love this part. It's so great. So then she said, she pulls out the signet, the staff, the cord, all of those things that Judah gave her. And I just imagine the scene is that, he wants everybody to know this, to know like his daughter-in-law was pregnant by somebody else. He probably wants her killed, not just because of the shame of that, but then she also doesn't have to marry Sheila. That's the way to get out of it. And so the crowds around there, and this is not in the Bible, but I just imagine them like chanting, like, burn her, like, they're all like looking at her, and he's like, stuff. And she's like, then she pulls out that signet ring, the cord, the staff, all of that. And she said, please identify whose these are, the signet and the cord and the staff. Then Judah identified them and said, she is more righteous than I, since I did not give her to my son, Sheila, and he did not know her again. So he could have fought. He could have, really done something. But when she pulled those out, it was like, you're caught red-handed, that this is your identification. You left this with me. And I'm showing everybody, because you wanted this to be a scene, so I'm showing everybody that you are the person that did this. Now, for us, we can kind of think, well, that wasn't great of Tamar. Like, she could have just gone to him and said, hey, I want to marry Sheila. She could have gone in silence, but remember, or in just, between the two of them. But remember, he has done nothing to prove that he is trustworthy at all. All he's done is lie to her and deceive her. And so she gets in front of this crowd so other people can be witnesses of what happened. And I don't think it's just to shame him. I do think it is also to protect her, to show that this is what has happened. Now, this passage that we just read doesn't ever give any indication of Judah's confession or how he felt later. But later in the Bible, about 10 chapters later, he goes to Joseph. There's, if you've read the story, the brothers come back, Joseph is alive, and he actually confesses the way God worked in his life to his brother Joseph. And that's in Genesis 44:16. And remember, he's speaking to his brother Joseph. So Judah said, what can we say to my Lord? And that Lord is lowercase because he's not talking about the Lord like God. He's calling Joseph his Lord because he is over him now as someone who is in charge in Egypt. What can we say to my Lord? What can we reply? Or how can we clear ourselves? Since God has exposed the sin and the guilt of your servants. And he's talking about himself. Behold, we are my Lord or my brother's slaves. So by the time later he meets his brother, he has realized, I have not done right. God has exposed the sins in my life. So the second idea that we can see from this story is that the Bible always points us back to the faithfulness of God. God's plan, this is what we're going to say over and over and over again this year. God's plan cannot be stopped by humans. Humans are deceitful. Humans are wrong. Humans are selfish. But God's plan cannot be stopped by the things that we can do. Even though people are not faithful to God, God is always faithful to us and to all the people that we're going to read about. He can redeem any situation, no matter how bad you feel that situation is. And we're going to finish up Genesis 38. When the time of her labor came, so this is Tamar when she's having her baby, there were twins in her womb. And when she was in labor, one put out a hand, and the midwife took and tied a scarlet thread around that hand, saying, "This one came out first." Remember that idea of the firstborn. But as he drew his hand back in, behold, his brother came out. And she said, "What a breach you have made for yourself." Therefore, his name was Perez, which means breach. Afterward, his brother came out with a scarlet thread on his hand, and his name was called Zerah. So this story of Tamar and of Judah is just filled with sin, with selfishness, with nothing going the way that it should have. But God remained faithful to his people, because in Matthew chapter 1, when we look at the lineage of Jesus, Judah, Tamar, and Perez are actually in the lineage of the Messiah. And that is something else that we talked about that with Ruth and Boaz last year. When you really start to look at who Jesus came from, his ancestors, it is full of people like this. And I think that's interesting because why didn't God choose Joseph for the Messiah to come through his line? Because Joseph, even though he was kind of a bratty kid and would say stuff to his brothers, he became very righteous, and he saved both the Israelites and the Egyptians at a time. I mean, he was a great, great man. But I believe that God decided to have our Messiah, our Redeemer, our Savior, to come from a line of people who were selfish, who were sinners, who did not follow him, to show that he's not from perfect people. Because he knew that none of us were perfect, and none of us would do everything that he asked of us. And he wanted to show that redemption of mankind through evil people. And the very last idea I have for us today is that there is beauty in the brokenness. Now, I have a picture. Carly, if you'll pull that up. There is something called a kintsugi art, kintsugi bowl. And so if we see this is a Japanese art form. And what happens is that if a piece of pottery is broken, instead of throwing away that piece of pottery, what they use is they use gold to put that back together. And so they don't hide the brokenness of it. I mean, you can see where the cracks had been, but this gold makes it, first of all, more beautiful. I mean, that's a beautiful piece of pottery, but it also makes it stronger. Where those scars were, where the hurt was, where it was broken, is actually stronger because it was put back together by this master artist. And an artist named Jan Wolf says this, and I put this in your bulletin because I think this is such a great story for us. The story of kintsugi may be the most perfect embodiment of our trauma-shattered lives. instead of throwing away broken, beloved pottery, will fix it in a way that doesn't pretend it hasn't been broken, but it honors the breaking, and more so, the surviving, by highlighting those repaired seams with gold lacquer. Now, the object is functional once again and dignified. It's not discarded. It's stronger and even more valuable because it's reinforced by those golden scars. So rather than trying to hide the hurt and the damage that happened, Kintsugi highlights this and shows it off and shows how this pottery can still be used. Judah was a broken man, and Tamar was a broken woman. But God is the restorer. And I just realized I have a painting in my office that I meant to bring out here, but I'll have it out for you guys to see. It's just a picture of God putting a woman together, and it shows her scars and her hurts, but he put her back together in the same way the kintsugi is put together. And that's what God does for us. I know a lot of you really well, and I know that you have had, this last year and maybe years before, have had hurt, have had pain. You have scars. We talked this morning about scars that we could see, but you have scars that none of us can see, things that have hurt. You have changed who you are. But I think it's so important for us to realize that God can take those and take those scars, take those things that we think that we could never get past, that have changed us, that have hurt us, and draw us away from him. But instead, they draw us closer to him. If you just turn to him and let him fill in those scars instead of pretending they're not there, instead of trying to hide them or trying to just be mad that they happened. And being mad is not wrong. That is part of the grief process. But eventually, let God come in and fill in those broken places, because just like that kintsugi bowl, it is more beautiful. And he sees us, he sees our scars, and he sees us as still usable, still needed, still wanted, and even better and stronger because of those scars that we have. Now, you know, I like to give you something all the time to help you kind of remember and think about this, because you might think that today, you might leave today thinking, yeah, like God has taken my scars, the things that have happened to me, and I know that he can make me stronger through them, and I know, but it's gonna come back. It's gonna hurt all the time. It's gonna come back. But we want something just to help remind us. Is this gonna make every day sunshine and roses? Of course not. There are hard, hurtful things that have happened, but we know that God is there. I would absolutely love to give all of you a kintsugi bowl today to take home. That would be my dream. But they run about $2,000 because they are very, very special and very important. And I love you guys, but that is out of my budget. So today instead, I know it's kind of cheesy, but today instead, laying on the altar, I got you guys sparkly Band-Aids. They were as close as I could get to the gold and the kintsugi bowl. So this is just for you to take, and you can stick somewhere, maybe your mirror or in your Bible or somewhere, just to remind you that those scars you have, those hurts that you have, can be beautiful, that God sees those as beautiful, and God can heal those and make you stronger through those. So, sorry, I went totally off my notes. I wanted to read in Corinthians a verse for you that kind of shows this, what this looks like in the New Testament, how Jesus kind of works in as part of this too. So 2 Corinthians 4:7-10 reads, "But we have this treasure in jars of clay, to show the surpassing power belongs to God and not to us. We are afflicted in every way, but not crushed, perplexed, but not driven to despair, persecuted, but not forsaken, struck down, but not destroyed, always carrying in the body the death of Jesus, so that the life of Jesus may also be manifested in our bodies. So what we're going to do is Caden's going to come up and just play for a little while. And I want you just to sit with this for a minute, because like I said, I know some of you really well. Some of you I don't know very well at all. But I know that all of us have those scars that nobody else sees. You might not even talk about them to somebody that's close to you, but we have those scars. And so while Caden plays, what we're going to do is just come up and take a Band-Aid, take a sparkly Band-Aid to take back with you. You can pray at the altar if you want to. You can take it back to your seat and pray, take it home, and just have it wherever, someplace that it will remind you how important you are to God and how meaningful your hurts and scars are to Him. Once we kind of are finished with that, Caden's going to go ahead and pray for us at the end. So just as he plays, just feel free to come forward and grab whatever you would like.